Hey guys, welcome back. Rob Staton of the BBC and Seahawks Draft Blog.com joins us on the show today. Rob, thanks for coming on the show.
Anytime, guys. Pleasure to be with you again.
Awesome. Hey, I know it was a couple days back, but obviously John Schneider had his big presser and touched on Pete, kind of a lot of emotions running through there, and then obviously got into, hey, what's next for the Hawks as far as the head coaching positions. And obviously there was a few things thrown in there that you could kind of take away from it, like stagnant and other words like that. What were your impressions of the overall presser there from John?
Well, I thought there was a lot of interesting things. The word stagnant that you mentioned there was quite an interesting use of language right at the start. I thought it was a bit of a Freudian slip, really. I don't think he intended to use that word in the press conference, but it kind of just fell out of his mouth. And then when one of the journalists quite rightly picked up on it and said, well, stagnant's quite an interesting word there. He goes, well, maybe stagnant's not the best way to describe it, but the damage was already done. And, that might have been an accidentally on purpose kind of thing there. I don't know. I've had the sense for a while now that the John and Pete Carroll have had tremendous respect for each other and have thoroughly enjoyed working for each other. But that if you were to give John some truth serum, he's probably for a few years now quite fancied a change and taking control and taking this thing in a different direction. And he now gets that opportunity. I think that was hinted at. I think the way that he spoke about what the modern trends are in the NFL and being conscious of that was quite interesting. The fact that, he talked about, well, a special teams coach would be interesting to have because of this, and this, but they're not interviewing any special teams coaches. So that, I kind of threw that one out. But then he says about how important it is that if you have a defensive coach, you might lose your offensive coordinator if he does well, which is a legit concern, which a number of people have been talking about for a long time. And it is a big, big issue. However much, there are still people out there going, get a defensive coach. None of this matters and stuff like that. It's just about being able to lead and stuff. Well, no, because if you actually look at the teams out there right now trying to appoint offensive coordinators who have defensive-minded head coaches, they're interviewing people like Cliff Kingsbury and Shane Waldron. So it is a bit of an issue if you constantly have to churn offensive coordinators, that when you lose a good one like Detroit are about to, good luck to them replacing Ben Johnson, because before they had Ben Johnson, they had Anthony Lynn in the 29th best offense in the league. So it is a big issue. And I thought it was a very interesting interview. I came away encouraged because it kind of, to me, felt like John Schneider was saying all the things that someone like me wants to hear. But now I want to see him kind of put his money where his mouth is and avoid what would be an underwhelming appointment. I'm sure we'll get on to who that might be, and go and get a coach that can invigorate this franchise and create a lot of excitement over the next few weeks.
Yeah, no, Rob, I definitely agree with you on the offensive-minded kind of tidbits that Schneider kind of laid there. The other 2 points for me that he made was when he made the comment about Marty Schottenheimer and how he said no coach should stay anywhere over 10 years. Well, Pete was there for 14 years, so I think that leads a little bit of credence to what you were saying about, maybe John had kind of, if you gave him truth serum, said, yeah, Pete should have gone 4 years ago and moved on. And then the other thing was when he was talking about Alex Smith in San Francisco and how they hired Mike McCarthy away from San Francisco when they had Mike Nolan as the head coach, and how that completely disrupted Alex's first couple years in the league. That to me just really kind of almost gave away what his plans truly are. And I think for me, like, we'll get into candidates, but like I agree, like Ben Johnson, Bobby Slowik, those are two of the guys at the top. For me, it's Bobby Slowik, and I don't take a lot of what happened yesterday to Bobby Slowik into it, where I've been on Twitter and everybody and their brother now in Seahawk land wants Mike McDonald as our new head coach because he shut down all these offenses. And I kind of went, yeah, but they've got a certain formula in Baltimore that's different than anywhere else. Unless he somehow can bring that entire staff and their GM over and everybody to draft guys that way, I don't see it being a successful transition if that was our case.
You're absolutely correct. And I think it's indicative in more ways than one. The fact that he was mentioned, they drafted Alex Smith and it disrupted the start to his career was also a major hint to me that he's itching to draft a quarterback. Yeah. It's not just that he wants to bring in an offensive-minded head coach to avoid what happened with Alex Smith. It's that he wants to avoid whoever he drafts having that same experience as well. And look, I'm sure we're going to get onto this. I don't want to jump the gun, but what you just said there is the exact same experience that I've had. You go on social media and everybody reacts to that's the problem with Twitter. It's something happens, everybody reacts to it, everyone's really reactionary. All of a sudden, it has to be Mike Macdonald. And I did a video about this earlier today that so you need to understand what Baltimore is. It's Ozzie Newsome for years, sort of setting up what a Raven is, the kind of players we're going to draft, the kind of team that we're going to be. They've won 2 Super Bowls that way, and they could win a third this year. Eric DeCosta just comes in, and he's been working with Ozzie Newsome for years. He was essentially the guy that they trained to replace Ozzie Newsome, who is still involved with the Ravens, by the way. They know exactly who they are. They're not coming with Mike Macdonald. Neither will the assistant head coach, defensive line coach, who arguably is just as important as Mike Macdonald is for creating this defense. He isn't going to bring Lamar Jackson with him. Mike Macdonald's defense, Mike Macdonald's done a really good job. No one can deny that he has done a really good job. But the Ravens win because they are better than anybody else at applying scoreboard pressure. They get on you. They get 10, 15, 17 points ahead of you. You have to chase the game. And they just come after you when they've got that advantage. And they are brilliant at it. It's not Kyle Shanahan versus Mike Macdonald or Bobby Slowik versus Mike Macdonald. And Macdonald just keeps winning these matchups. There are so many elements to this. Harbaugh's a really good head coach who's really experienced. And there are so many different things that you could run through. If he comes over, where's his staff coming from? Because Jim Harbaugh's going to hire some guys that he'd want. John Harbaugh's going to promote some guys that he would want. To me, there's a reason why, at least as we're speaking, guys, they haven't put a request in for Mike Macdonald. And I suspect perhaps there's even a feeling with Mike Macdonald and other teams, maybe he's just not quite ready for this, that maybe he needs another year or two. And you could make the same argument for Bobby Slowik. Maybe so. But I think it's slightly different because the Ravens culture is so special. You cannot transplant that to other teams.
Yeah, no, that's that you bring up a point. We'll get into the head coaches here, but you bring up the point where maybe he's not ready or this guy's not ready, because Bryce and I have kind of talked about, like, it's great if you go offensive minded or defensive minded, whatever you want to go, but you got to have that balance of leadership and being able to stand up and talk to guys and lead a group of men, right? So that's kind of the other sometimes focus that a lot of, say, fans don't they sort of disregard sometimes. They just kind of look at what's on the field, and this coordinator is kind of, just throwing up points, and schemes are so creative and dynamic. But let's kind of jump over to your top candidates that you'd like to see, I guess, kind of 1 through 3, kind of starting with your number 1 guy, and then if you had 3 guys to choose from, and what would be the first guy that you'd like to see there?
Before I just get into this, I mean, you raise a really good point there. You do have to be able to stand up in front of a room of guys. But my approach to it, I think the modern NFL, it's about delegating. And I want a defensive coordinator who can stand up in front of his guys and deliver that stirring speech, get them playing with their hair on fire, be the father figure, be the leader, the alpha. What I actually want from my offensive coach is a cool head. And I want somebody who can tactically make the decisions before a game to set up a great game plan, and then more importantly, make the adjustments in a game to put points on the board. And I think that's the way that you have to be. And some other teams are set up where they maybe have an alpha. Campbell in Detroit's a good example of that. But then he has very strong lieutenants working as coordinators, but he's about to lose one of them. And then how he handles that's going to be really important. Same for D'Amico Ryans in Houston. So what I actually want to do is set up in Seattle where you do have that very intelligent, innovative offensive head coach with an alpha-style defensive coordinator. And you know what? Because the league is so against appointing defensive coaches, it gives you a better chance to keep that staff together. So that's sort of my first, when I'm setting up a top 3, that's what I'm thinking of at the forefront of my mind. So number 1 is Ben Johnson. I think the weapons that they have in Detroit, the running backs, the 2-headed monster running back, their receivers, the fact that he's really utilized the tight end. He's got the max out of Amon-Ra St. Brown, 3rd leading receiver in the NFL. Running backs, 24 total touchdowns between them. Sam Laporta, 10 touchdowns in as much yardage as George Kittle and Kelsey this year. The Seahawks have been built. Whatever your argument as to whether that should have been done this way or not, they've been built through their skill players. That's not a decision. It's not me saying I want to build through skill players. It's already been done.
Right.
Paying DK, paying Tyler, drafting 2 running backs second round, drafting Jackson Smith-Njigba. You've made that investment. Your left tackle is a pass protecting left tackle, finesse left tackle. You've made that. You've made your bed. You've got to sleep in it. So go and get somebody who can make the most of that investment. There isn't anybody better than Ben Johnson for that. He's doing it with very similar weapons in Detroit. Very intelligent guy. Has come from that Campbell system and is influenced by him. So that he can bring some of that. I think he is, without a shadow of a doubt, the top candidate and would give the Seahawks a chance to have their own version of McVay and Shanahan.
Right on. Yeah, real quick on Ben. I mean, I'd like him too. I'm hearing that that he's got close ties with the Commanders there. Is that kind of accurate? Because
he's probably going to go there.
Okay, yeah. Because I always said like this is such a good spot, like Seattle. And the only drawback is like if you just don't want to be in the Pacific Northwest for certain other reasons. But as far as like you said, the offense is just set up to really take that next jump and explode with all the talent we got, right? So that's all.
Imagine it. I mean, imagine a situation where DK Metcalf finally becomes the consistent dominant force that we know he can be. There's no reason why he can't be Julio Jones. Physically, they're the same. There's no reason why he can't be Mike Evans. He never has. Because the Seahawks have never had an offensive guy running the show who can get that out of him. And that's vital. Jackson Smith-Njigba, you telling me he can't do what Puka Nacua did? Like, there's without a doubt he can. Is it impossible for the Seahawks to ever have a tight end who can be a really vital part of the... Yes, he can. Can you run the ball effectively? Yeah. Even if they're just scoring in the red zone, let's find a way to do that. We forgot how to do that last season. So there's all these things. But here's the big problem. So the first thing is there's 2 big issues. The first one is, as you mentioned, his connection to Adam Peters. Apparently, they've had a conversation. Apparently, they are almost in agreement to become a package deal. And because Detroit's in the playoffs, that's probably just not been announced yet. But here's the other issue. The expectation is that Detroit's going to win tonight. We'll see. If Detroit wins, they're going to play again next week. If you have a feeling that he is destined for the Commanders and everybody else appoints their head coaches this week, they get a head start on staff. So you might be 10 days behind the 8 ball on appointing a supporting staff for your head coach. You might miss out on people waiting in a futile manner for someone who's not even going to come. So if you've got to make a call, you've got to know, I would say by Tuesday, the likelihood of Ben Johnson being able to be wooed to Seattle. And if you don't believe that he is open to getting on a plane, going and seeing Lake Washington, going and having a look around Renton, being convinced that this is the place for him, then you've got to move on because you need, this is something that not a lot of people are talking about. You are in a critical stage now where the Patriots are starting to talk to staff and they're talking to some impressive guys because they can do that now because everybody else is still going through and finding out who their head coach is going to be. The wheels have to start moving now. So if Johnson's a no-go, you have no other limitations. He's the only person left in the playoffs who you've requested an interview with. So if he's not going to happen, there's nothing preventing you from moving on this week, finding out who you want, going and landing them, and getting on with the job of finding a staff.
No, and I agree, Rob, with Ben Johnson. Like I think of there's so many similarities between our offenses, and you can theoretically, if you make cap room by some of the cuts we'll eventually probably talk about, you can build that interior offensive line. You can get a couple of guards. You can go get a center. You can go do those things to give him an offensive line like he's had and been accustomed to in Detroit. The other thing for Ben Johnson I like is his ability to turn Jared Goff's career around in a lot of ways when he left the Rams. And it also might lead to maybe we don't move off Geno. Not that Geno needs to be moved off of. He's been good. He hasn't been great, but he's been good. Based on where our draft position is, it might not force us to have to draft a guy, move up and get a guy. We can kind of maybe fill another hole and get a guy in later on in the draft that we want to develop, whatever that may be, like a Spencer Rattler, someone like that. But yeah, no, I definitely agree with you on Ben Johnson. I actually have mine flipped between the next candidate on this outline, but I have Bobby Slowik as my number one. Ben Johnson's my number two. So what's your thoughts on Bobby Slowik?
Incredibly impressive. I spoke to somebody who used to play in the NFL, and uh, there was a lot more about offensive play calling and stuff like that than I ever will. I'm not an X's and O's guy. And I asked him, look, is this guy the real deal? And he broke down reasons why he was. And I don't have them to hand, so I can't read them out, but it was a compelling argument. And look, there's just so many impressive things. The way that he speaks, the way that he's handled CJ Stroud, the way that he managed the game last week against the Cleveland defense, which has been really good. The Shanahan system, when we're talking, a lot of people have said this. Well, like, why, if it's so hard to transplant Mike McDonald's defense to Seattle, why will it be any easier to get the Shanahan offense? It just is, because it's one guy's offense. It's, if you either know the offense or you don't, you can install an offense. You can't install 20 years of experience and team building and culture setting. That's a lot harder to do. That takes a long time, but you can install an offense. You could do it tomorrow. You could appoint Kyle Shanahan's offensive coordinator, a passing game coordinator, and install his offense tomorrow. And he's shown that he can execute it at a high level because he did it with the Texans. So I think he's amazingly impressive. The only slight downside is he is very inexperienced in a way that even though McVay was 30, he was probably a bit more experienced than this guy is. But I'm all in on Slowik. And people saying, well, he struggled yesterday. Come on, what were they really expecting? The Ravens are the best team in the league by a mile at home in frigid conditions with everything sort of stacked in their favor against an upstart Texans team with rookies all over the place, including at quarterback, having overachieved to even be at 11 wins for the season coming into this game. It was just a major achievement that they were playing in the darn game. Like, what did you want to see expect? It had Ravens hammering written all over it. So that game doesn't mean anything to me. And I think it would be a bold, aggressive, exciting plan, the kind of which I've always thought John Schneider was all about. So let's do that. He's got so much out of the receivers in Houston and elevated them, and the quarterback. He's worked with a young quarterback and shown he can develop them. I think provided John can help him put a staff together, then I'm all in. And by the way, some of these defensive coaching interviews might just be coordinator interviews.
That's what I thought too. That was the same thing I thought too. And the other interesting thing, I don't know, Rob, but his dad actually coaches in Alberta for the Calgary Stampeders. So when you were talking about coming out to the West Coast, doing that kind of thing, you have that as a selling point, possibly like, hey, your dad's not that far from you now if you ever need advice or anything. And his dad did coach in the NFL for years to, again, possibly help out with connections that way. Like, that's why I look at Slowik and go, with John's help, maybe he's able to kind of do what the Rams did with McVay, bring in a alpha defensive coordinator and let him just focus on his side of the ball and getting that right with more weapons and more skill at the positions that he didn't have in Houston.
Can I read you two quotes out as well? So the first one is from the website Niners Nation. And I read this in an article a few days ago, and it's only a small quote. It says, "Good news for the Niners if the Seahawks hire Dan Quinn. Bad news for the Niners if the Seahawks hire Bobby Slowik." So I'm quite keen on doing the thing that they don't want the Seahawks.
Yeah, don't do what the Niners. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And then the other thing was this quote from Kyle Shanahan: "Bobby is as talented as anyone I've ever worked with." He's worked with the creme de la creme of offensive coaches in the NFL. Think of any McVay, LaFleur. We'll run through his dad. There's
Mike
so
McDaniel,
many. Mike McDaniel. Like, there's. What more do you need to hear?
Yeah,
and
no,
like
I agree with that, and I'm with you on going that direction. Like, the inexperience aside, sure, but like you said, like, just try to hit a home run and make a big splash with the guy that has this great offensive mind. Because I just think we're so set up. Like let's just have a average standard defense and just go kill it on offense because like you said, you've made your bed with the draft picks that you've done and guys that you've paid, and let's just go explode with this offense. And then just get someone in here that can manage the defense. We got some pieces, but not try to, like we've been doing in the Pete era, try to recreate this Legion of Boom. That's just not gonna ever happen. So yeah, I like that, Rob. What about number three? What's your
Well,
third guy?
just a quick point on that
Sure.
as well. That's what they've been trying to do:
Right.
recreate the LOB, live in the past. It's time to move forward. It's trying to do something different. Do you know what that should mean?
Mm.
I've been saying this a lot over this week. Really, I think there are three things you need to do as a team in the modern NFL. Okay, your first priority should be great in the trenches.
Mm.
So invest your picks and your money, O line, D line, and then if you can be better than most of your opponents up front, you'll win more games than you lose. Second thing, get a quarterback. You need a quarterback in the NFL. Settling at quarterback is settling for mediocrity. You need to keep going until you find a really good quarterback who you believe can win a Super Bowl within that system that is great in the trenches. And then the third thing you need to do is you need to master deception and misdirection as an offensive player caller, because that's how the modern NFL is. That's how you win. It's how you
Yeah.
scheme guys open. It's how you get cheap yards. It's how you get cheap points. It's how you apply scoreboard pressure. Once you've got that scoreboard pressure, your defense can fly to the ball. I will put young guys at safety and linebacker and say, go and fly after the ball carrier when you've got a 15-point lead. They're the three keys for me. Your lines need to be great. Get a quarterback, deception and misdirection. If you do those three things well, you'll be a pretty good football team. The third guy on my list, because some of these other offensive coaches, they've never called plays. Kafka has called plays, but I don't know. Some of the stuff that's going on in New York right now is. I even wonder if they appoint a defensive coach, whether that interview is a come and get me out, help me get me out of New York kind of thing going on here with Kafka as an offensive coordinator. So that's maybe something to keep an eye on. But yeah, Frank Smith's never called plays. So of all the candidates they're supposedly interested in or want to interview or have interviewed, I went with Vrabel just because he will have a ready-made offensive coordinator, presumably, in Arthur Smith. Whatever you think of Arthur Smith, he had the number 5 offense before he got the Falcons job. The guy sucks as a head coach, but probably could come in and be a competent offensive coordinator. No one's going to snatch him up anytime soon because of what happened in Atlanta. So there's no danger of losing your staff. I think Vrabel has, had some success with a fairly mediocre team, getting them to the AFC Championship. I don't hold him responsible at all, really, for the way things have collapsed in Tennessee, because the old GM traded away A.J. Brown. Then he got fired because he traded away A.J. Brown. They then appointed an interim GM who did the next draft. And then they bring in another GM. So that's not conducive with success, on top of Derrick Henry getting old and Ryan Tannehill getting old. So I don't really blame him for things spiraling a little bit there. They seem like a bit of a shambolic franchise. So good luck to Will Levis, I'm afraid. I think that he has some of the aspects that I could imagine coming in and making the Seahawks a tough, physical, hit you in the face team. And provided he has an offensive coordinator that you have faith in and you get him a quarterback, I think he could set up the kind of team that could be successful. I can live with it. I
Yeah.
wouldn't be my favorite, but I could live with it.
Yeah, no, I think you bring up some good points. I mean, I guess the one thing I would like, or we both kind of like, would just be that discipline factor that Vrabel brings, or hit you in the face kind of thing. Because I think as far as the discipline aspect of it, I think the Seahawks lacked a lot of that, and it was kind of evident this year with all the things that were happening. But yeah, yeah, it's one of those things. It's probably a safer hire too if you're John, right? And you kind of look at it like that too. But yeah, I wouldn't hate it. I guess real quick, what is there any in any world do they do they hire Dan Quinn? I mean, I'm not we're not in favor of it, but obviously his name's been tossed around and it's kind of a uh you know, going back in the past again, the way we look at it. But obviously he has ties there and has a relationship with John. Is there in any world that he could be a head coach here?
Yes, there is a world where that could happen, and part of me fears a little bit that they're going through this process to see if anybody can knock Dan Quinn out of their top spot for the job, because look, there's no smoke without fire. Even 4 weeks before the end of the season, people were going, oh, Pete might retire and Dan Quinn will take over. Dan Quinn's been turning down other jobs because he's waiting on Seattle. Why is he doing that? Has he been given any indication that the Seahawks would happily give him a call? You know, John said he'd been preparing for this day for a while. Has he been, you know, it happens. People talk in the NFL. Hey, Dan, you know, if Pete walks, would you be up for this? That could easily be a conversation that's been had over the last couple of years. So I don't want it to happen just because I think it screams 8 and 9. You know, there's just, it will be so unexciting. You know, Pete's old defensive coordinator coming in, having had all of the success in the world with the LOB, and then all of the success in the world with Kyle Shanahan, the quintessential offensive mind of his generation next to Sean McVay, and then having a bit of success with Micah Parsons. And then, well, we're going to bring him to Seattle and he's going to get the best out of, I don't know, Boya Mafe. I mean, come on, like, what are we doing here? Are we honestly saying that this is, like, his defense was so bad against Green Bay. He is so incapable of dealing with misdirection and deception, which is the one thing of 5 minutes ago I was saying is really important. Yeah. And okay, you can build a staff. Great. Yeah. So what? Somebody sent me an article the other day, and it was the, I can't remember his name. Greg Rosenthal at NFL.com ranked the hires in 2017, and he put Anthony Lynn first, Sean McVay second, and Kyle Shanahan fourth. And Anthony Lynn was at the top because he'd been in the job before, he was a great leader, and he could build a staff. And I'm thinking, okay, there's a lesson. Let's not go for someone who. Let's go for the guy who was second on the list, who changed the game. You know, because he was described as a risky hire. You know that, and Shanahan, a risky hire. No, let's not go down that road. But is there a chance? I'm afraid there is. But it would be so underwhelming. He was 24 and 29, guys, in Atlanta after Shanahan went. And I was reading the articles yesterday about what went wrong when he was 0 and 5 when he got fired. Oh my God, no. Just don't. If you do this, Seahawks, you are going to ruin what could be a really interesting next 3 months.
I kind of look at it the same way, Rob. Like, I look at it as, let's completely turn this page. Let's go in a different direction, because Pete Carroll had his era. And like we've all said from the beginning of it, it kind of was like two eras. You had the LOB and then the post-LOB Russell Wilson era. And Pete's been celebrated for the last, week after he got let go and everything. And I feel like if you bring Dan Quinn in, you're extending that era, because it's the same defense. And people are like, oh, he's changed it. The principles are still the same. It still can't handle the certain offenses we're going to face 4 times a year in our own division. And it also allows, in my opinion, like, I listen to KJ Wright's podcast on 710 quite a bit, and he's hammering the table for Dan Quinn to come in. There needs to be a change of guard completely. And I think John, and this was interesting because I also listened to KJR, and Mike Holmgren seems to be a little bit more involved now, back with the organization since Pete stepped out. John's there. I would like to see John tap back into his Ron Wolf backing. And Ron Wolf didn't hire a lot of defensive guys. He hired Ray Rhodes for 1 year. They went 8-8, and he fired him and went to Mike Sherman. Stay in that path. Take the risk. Go do it. Go push the envelope a little bit and steer away from what you've had. Let that culture die and that era die a little bit. And you can still have the great facilities. Like, culture isn't just about what Pete was. It's the facilities. It's the support staff. It's all these other things. That's still there with John Schneider. The ownership's great. The facility, the fans, everything. But steer the actual football side of it in a different direction and incorporate that culture with it and create a new culture there. That's what I want to see them do. And I'm terrified they're not going to do that.
See, what you just said to me sounds like ultimate common sense. But then there are so many people saying the complete opposite. There isn't a day goes by that I don't turn the radio on and there's some journalist in Seattle saying it's going to be Dan Quinn because they've got to keep the culture there and they want to keep everything that was Pete Carroll. It was good about Pete Carroll, but turnover. And it's like, well, why don't you just keep Pete Carroll then? Whenever I hear that, I think that idea can take a running jump, because what is the point? Like, the culture was not good enough last year. It was cigars in the locker room. It was Jamal Adams on Twitter. It was DK Metcalf saying, we weren't. The Rams wanted it more. Like, one of the big issues, I was just saying that I was reading about some of the issues with Quinn. One of the issues with Dan Quinn when he was fired was that he did not hold guys accountable enough, that he was giving guys endless chances. He wouldn't bench Vic Beasley, even though he was doing absolutely nothing in the team, because he was standing by his guys. We don't need this. This is what we've had under Pete. It's time for something different. The Pete era was great. Clean break, move on. You can appoint any of these guys. They can still have a decent culture and vibe around the building. It's not like you either have a Pete guy or it's essentially Matt Patricia. There's something in between that. It can be different, and it's time for something new. So please, Seahawks, let's just give something else a go. And I think John understands that and is ready to embrace that. I'm touch wood. I'm clinging to that thought.
I'm crossing my fingers. You're right, Rob.
Yeah, no, I agree with that completely. I think, and just going back, I just think when we talked about the press conference start the show, he was sort of hinting that in a few ways, right? Just the shelf life, the stagnant. He knows, I think, that the NFL is changed, and I don't want to sit here and say that games passed Pete by, but it's tough when you have a certain mindset and a way of doing things a long time ago, and you still try to do the same thing, that you just need that clean break. And so, yeah, I think we're all in agreement that I think, yeah, the first top two guys you mentioned would be amazing, and Vrabel you wouldn't be mad at, because I think he would hold guys accountable, and sort of certain aspects that Vrabel would bring into that building, and he wouldn't be taken over, right? That culture, like we all agree, would be something similar, right? So okay, moving on. I know we're a couple months out from it, but and I guess things sort of have to settle in with the coaching and who you ultimately hire. But when you look ahead, just with your opinion, I know you cover the draft a lot. We're at number 16. We got the number 16 pick, kind of middle of the pack, and so what would be the biggest need? And if you're at 16, obviously, we can both agree on line and offensive and defensive and quarterback. But if you're at 16, what do you like there? What do you think the Seahawks' biggest need is? And do you keep that pick, or do you kind of trade down and kind of accumulate some more picks there?
Well, the biggest need is going to be a long-term answer at quarterback until they get a long-term answer at quarterback. That's, again, that's nothing to do with Geno Smith, because people will respond back saying Geno's not the problem. It's not a suggestion that Geno was ever the problem. It's a suggestion that Geno is 34 this year, and you are eventually going to have to find somebody else. I don't think Geno Smith will win the Seahawks a Super Bowl. So until you have somebody who you believe that quarterback can help us win a Super Bowl, you have to keep looking. And even if Geno Smith starts this year, you still have to look for quarterback. The problem is, I think it's going to be very hard to find that guy in this draft, because you're going to have a situation where, Caleb Williams is going to be the first overall pick. Jaden Daniels and Drake May are going to go off the board very quickly after that. And then the other guys who probably shouldn't go in round one, JJ McCarthy, Bo Nix, potentially Michael Penix, whose stock could, like with Penix, I could see him going anywhere from 16 to 76. Like it could be anything. It could be any range for him. But with those guys, there are question marks that, we could probably spend an hour talking about these guys. So I'll just kind of skip to the end of the book and just go, I'm not sure that this is a solution. The one guy who I find somewhat interesting is Spencer Rattler, because he played for Dwayne Loggins, who was, in the NFL for a number of years. There were definite pro concepts and terminology in the South Carolina offense last year. He had to play behind one of the worst defensive lines in college football. So his environment was very NFL-esque, throwing under pressure, having to create and scramble away from pressure, extend plays, having to just be under constant duress. And when you compare that to Bo Nix, throwing it into the flat or screen, every other play. Well, more than every other play. Getting sacked. He was sacked 0.4 times a game. And people go, oh, sacks is a quarterback stack. Yeah, but okay. If you are throwing the ball because of the scheme demands that sideways on a massive amount of your throws, you are not going to get sacked. That is not the NFL. And when he gets pressure and when he gets sacked, is he going to turn back into Auburn's Bo Nix? That's the concern. And with Penix, again, pitch and catch, so many games. Then he had like an 8-game stretch where he was throwing, his completion percentage went down by 15%. So massively inconsistent. So with Rattler, there was more consistency there. He was making more with less. The only issue with Rattler is there are lingering concerns within the NFL, because I've spoken to people about this who are really good sources. And they were talking about stuff that happened at Oklahoma. Not really bad stuff, just stuff that you kind of just tut and roll your eyes at. That he's going to get asked about at the Senior Bowl, on the combine, and in meetings. And he needs to own all of that stuff. Say, I was a douche. I'm not anymore. Here's 3 phone numbers of people you can ring to validate what I'm saying to you. And I'm a much more mature person today than I was 3 years ago. And if he can convince teams that of all of those things, he's very interesting. But he might still go in the 3rd round as a consequence of that. And if he does, I hope the Seahawks are ready to pounce, because he has as much natural talent as anybody short of Caleb Williams in this draft. So that's the quarterback thing. For me at 16, it's a great offensive line draft, but what's Abe Lucas' status? If he's going to come back, then you don't need a tackle. If you do need a tackle, it's a very obvious point there. There are 2 pass rushers who, for me, are blue chip players, Jared Verse and Chop Robinson. If either of those 2 players were at 16, it'd be very hard not to take them. But if you're not going to go offensive tackle, and if you're not going to go with either of those 2, and you're not taking a quarterback, as much as people will probably want to throw something at the screen, listening to this, I would not be against sort of moving down a few spots to get a bit more value, because this is an absolutely loaded class at center in day 2. Some great guards on day 2. There's going to be some good defensive tackles in day 2. And it's rich at receiver. So, depending on what happens with Tyler Lockett. So that's my mindset for this draft. I don't think it's going to change. I don't think whoever they appoint will change any of that. That's kind of where I'm at with it, number 16.
Yeah, I know, Rob. I definitely kind of agree with you on the quarterback situation. Like, I really was hoping Quinn Ewers was going to come out, because that's who I was like, I wanted him in Seattle. Like, I like Michael Penix. I'm a Huskies fan, but I can see some of his limitations now with he didn't have a lot of pressure most of the games. And when they did apply pressure to him, his, like you said, percentage of completion dropped drastically. And I think, like you said, there isn't someone that you look at in the first round, unless it's Williams, May, or Jaden Daniels, and go, that is an immediate upgrade. That's a guy that can win us a Super Bowl, and we're going to spend our first round pick on that guy. So I'm okay going in, like, I agree with you. Like, JJ McCarthy's another guy I'm kind of interested in if he's in day 2, day 3, like somehow after the process. He's like a Spencer Rattler, and people realize he's 20 years old. He hasn't thrown a lot of passes in college because Michigan was a very run-heavy offense. Bring him in and let him sit a year or 2 behind Geno, because he is only 20 years old, 21 years old. So you've got a little bit of youth there that you can, hey, we can bring him in, and I think he'd be an upgrade over a Drew Lock as a backup quarterback, as a rookie. So yeah, for me, I'm kind of in the same boat as you. Me and Ryan have talked about it. Trade back, get some picks. Geno can still win you games. He may not win you the Super Bowl, but I don't think the Super Bowl is an attainable goal right now. It's how do we close the gap between us and the 49ers by, instead of it being a 2-touchdown game, to a 1-touchdown game. Let's build the O-line. Let's get some guys in the middle. Please draft and upgrade the linebacker position, and don't rely on Bobby Wagner and Jordan Brooks anymore. Like, I'm done seeing that. I love Bobby, but Bobby's done. Like, let him go off into the Hall of Fame, and that be that. And kind of just, I'd like to see those kind of things take place this year in the draft. Like, this to me seems to be a let's fill our void draft before we go get that quarterback, like they did in 2010 and 2011. build up the rest of the team, then insert your rookie quarterback so he doesn't have to do a whole bunch in his beginning of his career.
Yeah, I completely agree with everything you've just said there. And I think it was interesting how lukewarm John was on about Geno Smith when he spoke about him the other day. He could easily have said he's our guy, you know. Blah, blah, blah. I don't know if that was about negotiating, because they are going to have to negotiate his salary down a little bit this year. I mean, it's like 3 times more expensive than he was this year, and he didn't play 3 times better. So there has to be a negotiation there. I do wonder a little bit whether John thinks, do you know what, we'll save that money and we'll go with Drew Lock, because John, you know, it seemed like Pete Carroll was Geno Smith's biggest supporter in that building. So I don't know what's going to happen there with that. I don't know how I would feel about that, but we will see. I agree with you on Quinn Ewers. It's going to be interesting. This is another reason why they should probably go with an offensive coach, because if you go with an offensive-minded head coach, listen, Detroit's 2 guards are free agents this year. Everyone's gone about, wow, they've got an amazing O-line in Detroit. Well, go and get their 2 guards.
Yeah,
bring them over. Go and draft a center, or bring in Tyler Bieres from Dallas or whatever. Go on. You can build your line. You have an offensive coach. You've got the weapons there already. And then what you could do in the draft is, if one of those 2 pass rushers are there at 16, I don't think they will be. I think Chop Robinson and Jared Verse will both go in the top 10. But if either of them were there, you get them. You maybe get Peyton Wilson to play. I mean, Peyton Wilson, by the way, I don't know if you've seen this guy at NC State. He'd be a top 10 pick if it wasn't for his injury history. The guy's an absolute... He's Luke Kuechly mixed with Micah Parsons. He is an absolute joke of a player. Go and watch his... Anybody listening to this, go and search for Peyton Wilson, NC State, on YouTube after you've watched it. Watch his highlight video and tell me that he isn't one of the best 15 players in this draft class. He is by an absolute mile. The injury history might knock him back a bit. He's somebody who could be a complete X factor. So do you see what I mean? Like, you've got the offensive coach, you've got everything working offensively, you bring in a defensive coordinator with some experience and some talent, and then you stick a pass rusher off the edge who can actually get to the quarterback and actually be a game wrecker and do these things like maybe Verse and Robinson can. And then you go and stick someone like Peyton Wilson, who just flies around the field like every single down is his last one of his life. And then I'm telling you now, we'll win some football games next year. This is, and you can still spend a couple of picks, on a Rattler, on a guard, Zach Zinter, if he lasts, go and get that guy. There's so many options for the Seahawks here. It is quite exciting. And maybe you do wait till next year. I think Quinn Ewers, to me, feels very John Schneider. And I was, like you, hoping he would come out, because I think John will like him a lot. I think his natural talent is there to all to see. People were watching that Washington-Texas game and going, I wasn't that impressed with Ewers. I've watched, because I'm a bit of a sad act, I've watched that game twice just to watch Ewers play twice. I've watched Penix twice and Ewers twice in that game. When you actually just watch his snaps, he's a lot better than people remember from that game. So he's somebody to keep an eye on maybe for next year.
So, Rob, just to give you a little bit of insight here, Tom Paracello just dropped some news about the Seahawks. They've set up second interviews with the DC from the Panthers, the DC from the Raiders, Patrick Graham, Mike Kafka, Raheem Morris, and Dan Quinn. That worries me a little bit.
Okay. Well, first things first. Some of...
I know it's a thorough process, but
I want to word this in the right way. You have to interview 2 candidates that sustain your obligations to the Rooney Rule.
Yeah.
So that list would enable that.
Right.
I don't know what that means, because obviously they were talking to Bobby Slowik today.
Ben Johnson yesterday.
And Ben Johnson yesterday. So does this mean that they're now not going to interview Bobby Slowik? Is it just a case of that hasn't been set up yet because they only spoke to him today, whereas they spoke to Quinn like 4 days ago now? I don't know. Is it, they can't... I'm guessing Ben Johnson isn't going to be flying over to Seattle in the middle of a playoff hunt. So that wouldn't happen for now anyway. And obviously with Vrabel, they could arrange something whenever. They don't have to report that to the league. So I don't know. But if it's one candidate from that list, oh dear.
Yeah, that's literally what I thought. in my head, I went, okay, I know you have to commit to the Rooney Rule and do that process. Maybe it's another like coordinator kind of, let's get a feel if there's still a coordinator possibility. But when the last name I read, I went, oh dear. Oh dear on the last name when it was DQ again. I went, oh, here we go. And I hope they go through with Bobby Slowik. But apparently, talking about the Commanders a little bit there with Ben Johnson earlier, apparently Bieniemy had an interview and it went quite well with ownership there. So maybe we'll see what happens there with the new GM and that. Who knows? But
I am very skeptical of that. That to
yeah,
me speaks, and look, in this, listen, I'm not a fan of it because we have these conversations in this country all the time about whether we should have the Rooney Rule in the English football,
Right.
and I'm not a big advocate for it because you end up creating interviews that are there purely for the obligation of the rule,
right.
and I don't think that's a positive thing. You know, having
Right.
these kind of charade interviews, and I fear a little bit. You know, when I read that he'd had an interview, I just caught my eye just on Twitter, like you said. I couldn't help but be drawn to thinking this is just for that purpose, that they've already made their mind up and now they're just having an interview with the guy in the building already for the sake of that, because he hasn't had an interview anywhere else. Now, the thing about the Tom Pelissero tweet, I've got it up here. He is saying there likely will be others too, a thorough process.
Which is good.
Yeah.
So all I can say is thank goodness for those final two sentences there.
Yeah, no kidding.
Yeah, no, for sure. Hey, Rob, real quick, just coming back to the draft, just one last question on it. The you talked about the line, and we obviously gave up a big pick for Leonard Williams coming in here, a second rounder. So now we don't have a second rounder. Is it essential then that that's our number one target when we go after free agents? Are we looking to throw some big money at him?
Yeah, I think so. And that's not, if there's one thing I really can't stand, other than the suggestion that Dan Quinn should get the job just because he knows where the parking lot is this idea that it's what's the term? I can't remember what the term is, that people are saying essentially you just because you've traded that second round pick, you can't then argue you should sign him because that's already been and gone, that pick. No, I think Leonard Williams played well enough that you should want him around. And if he was a free agent, I'd want to sign him. So I don't know why you wouldn't want to keep him. We've seen what he can do in Seattle, and I would keep him for that reason. I think he is a key player. And if you did just rent him for 10 games, that would be a massive disappointment, given that he was going to be a free agent anyway. So yeah, I would keep him. And look, the estimates are he may earn about $17 million a year, which is exactly how much Draymond Jones is on, who was a nothing burger in his first season. So
Yeah.
he's got an out in his contract. Maybe you could just switch that around. I mean, just get rid of Jamal Adams and give the money to Leonard Williams. Let's just do that. You save $16.5 million for cutting Jamal Adams. Just give it to Leonard Williams. Play Julian Love.
Yeah.
Cut Quandre Diggs, save another $11 million. Go and find a safety from somewhere like most teams do. Save some money by cutting Brian Manet. Go and get this guy, and make sure he stays. Go and get another one.
Yeah.
Listen, I'd keep him, be prepared to move on from the other defenders, including Jordan Brooks, and then go and put money and experience in your offensive line. Guys who've been in the league and have done it, not necessarily younger guys. And then if there is a great lineman you want to get in the draft, bonus. But ultimately, if you've got Leonard Williams and you've got experienced guys in your trenches, you go into the draft there, being able to go best player available rather than instead of having to force things for need. And that's when you can maybe see, listen, I don't think there's any chance that Jared Verse and Chuck Robinson will be there. But if they are, you go for them. If not, you trade down. You do look at someone like Peyton Wilson. You do look at other linebackers that are in this draft. You do look at a variety of positions. You're a bit more open-minded about quarterbacks because you feel like you've addressed your lines. So that's the way I would go. But I really want to know the coaches, because that might steer us. And when you're looking through that list, and there's Mike Kafka's the only offensive name on that list, and Mike Kafka is as highly rated as he was during his time at Kansas City. He's not exactly the most inspiring person. When you read the articles in the New York papers this week saying that essentially Brian Daboll shouted at him for not running the ball enough. And then when he ran the ball, he said, "You're not running it the right way." And then he just did what Brian Daboll told him to do. It doesn't exactly strike you as somebody who's ready to come in and lead a football team. So come on, Tom, get those sources out there and go and find a couple of more names for us
Yeah,
by the end of the day.
Is it just the fact that this is kind of like John's first, like, he hasn't done this in 14 years or whatnot, so it's like we're just going to spread that net ultra wide and just bring in as many candidates and with those top one or two on his mind that he'd like to hire, but just in case, let's bring them all in and we have a deadline of when to make a decision. Is that kind of where his mindset might be at?
Yeah, I think there's definitely that. I mean, and why not? If I was John, I'd want to speak to as many guys as possible. Just don't appoint any of these ones. That's
Yeah.
but here, look, let's just be real. Like, there's a chance that Ejiro Aviro, if you get him in and you have a great connection and a great bond and he likes the place and you're really impressed with him, there's a chance that he's not going to be with the Panthers in 2 weeks because they're going to appoint their own head coach. He may be a defensive coordinator. Patrick Graham, they've just appointed a new coach in Vegas. What if he doesn't want to stay in Vegas? Panthers and the Raiders are a shambolic organization. If you bring him to Seattle and he's impressed, they might want to prefer to come and work it. And by the way, you get complete control. You get a complete control of the defense. It's your baby. You go away and do it. So that might be appealing. You can make them both assistant head coach and give them a whopping salary. Then that may even be a promotion. There might be nothing that the other two teams can do if you make them an assistant head coach because they might consider that as a promotion. If you appoint Vrabel, maybe Mike Kafka says, "Yeah, I'm going to come and run Andy Reid's offense for Mike Vrabel." And I'd be down with that as an offensive coordinator. He was very highly rated by Reid. Raheem Morris, probably you're not getting him out of the Rams to do the same job. But then with Dan Quinn, who knows? Like, what? He's not exactly the most popular guy in Dallas right now. If the Seahawks said, "Listen, Dan, we really like you. We want you in this building. So what we want to do is we want to make you assistant head coach to Bobby Slowik. And we want you to sort of work with him, reconnect that Shanahan-Quinn relationship that you had. You be a sounding board for him. That's the direction we want to go. And we want you to have the next 5 years of your career in Seattle. We want you to do that because we love you in this building. Can we make it happen? We'll make you assistant head coach and we'll double your salary." I don't know. Maybe maybe not double his salary, but you get my point.
Yeah.
Like maybe they could do that. Maybe this is what this is all about. Or maybe I'm just clutching at straws. I don't know.
No, it makes sense, Rob. I think that's a good idea. Like, I think partly is maybe getting guys back in here just to, hey, like, this is our idea. This is where we're thinking of going. We'd love to have you in here in some capacity, whatever it is. And like you said, especially with the guys from the Panthers and Raiders, like, both those defenses actually were very good this year. Like, the Raiders defense amongst the chaos that went on. And I know they've hired Antonio Pierce, which I think was the smart move for them to do. But, like you said, maybe there's guys that are able to come in here and help that defense and help a Slowik or that. And because that was one thing, John has complete control now over that coaching staff. It's not the head coach like Pete, where he had control over all the coaches and John had no say. John now has say over that. And I think that's another kind of key thing that's kind of in this. And I would not be shocked if Mike Holmgren is not really involved with this process going forward, whether it's Slowik that comes in, Ben Johnson on a second interview. But speaking of that and kind of coaches that Seattle has had, where does Pete Carroll go from here? Like, do you see him taking another coaching job in a year or hanging out somewhere in a building? Like, he's been at the University of Washington now. His son's the offensive coordinator there. He knows Jed Fish because he was his quarterback coach. Like, I don't think this advisor role that got announced really there's any kind of concreteness to that. And Pete didn't allude to it really. And even when they asked John, he's like, it's yet to be determined. Well, if you're going to announce that, you'd think it would be more definitive of what that advisor role was going to be. So I don't know if that was just a puff piece to kind of soften the blow with the community that, hey, we fired Pete. We're not saying we fired Pete. He moved to a new position.
You're absolutely right. I mean, he was fired. This was a soft landing for Pete. He was fired. He was going to get paid for the next year, whatever, the last year of his deal. instead of firing him and it being a bit of an embarrassment and a negative thing, they say he's going to stay with us as an advisor. But like he pretty much came out afterwards and said, I fought for my job. I don't know what the advisor role is going to be. We'll work that out down the line. So he's not part of any real decision making in He's being fired. I don't know if you guys have ever seen it. You know, a few people may have done. I don't know. I'm seeing him like I saw a picture of him watching like something to do with the Huskies, or was he at a high school basketball game the other day? And he was at the Huskies facility the day after Jed Fish was appointed. I know his son's gone in there.
Yeah.
It just I kind of just had this bad vision of anybody who's watched the English version of The Office when David Brent loses his job and then goes back in with a dog and keeps going back into the office, and the boss has to come out and go, you don't work here anymore, David. Why are you here? I've just got this bad feeling that he's going to like just keep popping up at Renton or at the Huskies facility. Like, is there anything I could do, guys? Is there anything? Do you need me to coach some DBs? You know, I mean, he's somebody who's just going to, he's going to be utterly awful at being retired. Like he's not going to be able to just go on holiday for a long period of time or pot around the house or get into a Netflix binge like most of us would do. He's going to be at a loose end. And I feel a little bit bad for him because I always kind of think, well, when I retire, I'm just going to write about the Seahawks every day. That's great. And I'll watch football and I'll like hang around my hopefully grandkids one day.
Yeah.
But with Pete, like he's like someone who's probably worked 15 hours a day for the last 40 years. And now he's like, I've got nothing to do. I don't know. And so I feel kind of bad for him. I don't think he's ever going to coach again. I mean, it's just, I'm sorry. It was time in Seattle. And I don't think any owner's going to go, yeah, we want can you win a game in the fourth quarter speech. I think we're all, it's a shame. I wish that he would have just, I think he would have done if they'd have won that second Super Bowl. I think he'd have retired years ago.
Huh.
I think he was always chasing,
right,
putting that one right. And that's a shame. If it had just gone after 2017, which was the speculation, it would have been better for everybody.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, you bring up some good points, especially with that second one, because I think he knew and how there was talks how that locker room just wasn't as motivated coming back for that following season, and man, he knew that he had to try to make it right, but it just got further and further away from him, and now I think Jody and John realized this guy's just not going to leave on his own terms. And like you said, it's a shame because it would have been nice if he just kind of would have sort of walked off into the sunset on his own terms. But we're here now. And yeah, it's a guy like that. It's going to be tough for him to not be involved somehow. So, I mean, you kind of answered it, but I guess that would have been my next question would be, would he at all be on anyone's list, or is that it for him?
I think that's it for him. I mean, he's not going to want to get back into college football because college football is chaotic. It's a nightmare. I mean, just look how it's a shambles, isn't it? Like this idea that, look, I don't have an issue with Kalen DeBoer taking the most high-profile job in college football. Frankly, apologies to any Husky fans. Like it is what it is. You know, coaches, players, they're moving around so much these days. But then this idea that happens, and then like the center at Washington, I was in Washington's facility like about, when was it? It was around Thanksgiving time. It was Thanksgiving Day when I was there. And everybody, the center's amazing. The center, what a player he's going to be. And DeBoer goes and the center's the first one out the door to go with him to Alabama. And you're thinking, oh, come on, guys. You know, what are we doing here? There needs to be a proper, almost contractual obligation to these teams now. Like it'd be no different than like Pete's left Seattle, and therefore DK Metcalf and Leonard Williams and Charles Cross have decided they're entering the transfer portal.
Yeah.
And they've just gone because the coach has gone. I mean, it's just preposterous. The idea now that Washington, having lost all of their players, will then just go and replace them with all of Arizona's. And then Arizona will go and replace all of their players with, I don't know, Fresno State's players, whatever. Like, what are we doing here? And I don't think Pete wants any part of that. So, and then in the NFL, I just can't see it. The guy's 73 this year, isn't he? Like 73. Belichick's going to get back in because he's won 6 Super Bowls. Like Pete's won 1. It's done. I just hope that he can find. I know boxers who retire and all of a sudden, without that excuse to get up every day and go and train, they go off the rails a little bit. I'm not saying Pete's going to go off the rails, but they're at a loose end. And Pete's going to be, I just fear that he's going to be at a loose end. He's going to have nothing to do. He's this Mr. Hyper, wants to be around guys all the time. Is he going to have anything to do? But I don't see a job out there for him. Maybe if UCLA lose Chip Kelly to the NFL, as was reported earlier, he'd fancy going to UCLA. But that would be a turn up for the Bucs.
I honestly think Pete's like if it was, looking at what Pete's done great and kind of what he said in his press conference too about how important the players are, I think Pete would be a very good, now that he's retired, takes a year away, somehow gets back into the maybe he ends up being, the president of the NFLPA or something in that regard where he's working with the players, creating, a better work environment theoretically for them, because that's what he cared about the most was the players. Get out of the coaching game, go and try and make an impact somewhere else within the game, but to help those players deal with the NFL, the commissioners, whatever, making the game safer, whatever it is. That to me seems like a better succession plan for Pete Carroll than, hey, I'm going to go back into college now after however many years with the NIL and, like you said, the transfer portal and all this stuff. Or, the worst thing I could see for Pete is going somewhere like, I don't know, say something doesn't work out with the Chargers, whoever they hire, he goes there and it's an abysmal 2 years for Pete where they don't win a game, they're less than 500. And it kind of like what happened with Russ going to Denver. Like, you have such a fall off because you're just not the same as what you were. And it really tarnishes your legacy rather than just kind of riding out what happened. You left Seattle, you left on a winning record, just go off kind of into the sunset and that be that.
Yeah, I think that's it. And, I want to be able to just enjoy the start of that era, and I feel a little bit like it already is a little bit tainted for me. I know that there's a lot of people out there will hate me. I mean, look, I see the messages. People do not like you're talking about Pete Carroll in anything other than the most effusive style. But it is a little bit tainted. It just clung on a bit too long, and they've not done anything. I feel like I personally, I'm 40 this year. When you're going to get to this age, you do start to feel like I've just wasted 5 years of my Seahawks fandom. I want to see us win another Super Bowl between now and the age of 60. I feel like I've just wasted 5 years of potentially having that. So I do want to be able to remember that, but I think it'll be easier to remember that if he isn't sort of around all the time. I wonder whether, a role like that, and maybe a bit of media work. I don't know. I always find it quite interesting to listen to Mike Holmgren, and if there was a way for Pete to sort of do some of that. But then I do worry a little bit that he would still be interfering to an extent, and wouldn't really be able to give an honest opinion on anything because it would be a little bit inappropriate. And KJ Wright, when he does the radio shows, I always kind of feel that 1 week he comes in all guns blazing, and then the week back he rows everything back because someone's texting him going, "What were you saying that for?" So, I don't know. I mean, listen, thanks, Pete, but I'm ready for something totally new. And Bert, Jody, John, if you're listening, it'd be quite nice to sort of see a different direction now and see a new era of Seahawks football in all its glory, not just Dan Quinn coming back.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, Rob, we really appreciate you coming on and hanging out with us and just talking coaching. And it's a crazy time right now because it's just like we're in an interesting spot where it's like this could set us up for the next few years of some like you said, you're turning 40. We want to see not more wasted time here. We want to kind of get going and we know what this team's capable of especially on the offensive side of the ball. So hopefully, kind of those names you threw out, one of those names kind of sticks, and hopefully one of the top 2 guys you threw out there. But hey, Rob, real quick, where can listeners find your stuff? We know you got the blog, and but all the media platforms, social media platforms, where can people hear you?
So the main things, Seahawks Draft Blog.com, or one word. is the blog, and if you like long reads, then there's lots of long reads on there. And then Rob Staton Football is my YouTube channel, and there's a lot of stuff on there, a lot of live streams as well. And then I only really active on Twitter, X, whatever it is, under @Rob Staton, all one word. And I will warn you that is my day job is covering soccer in England, so 50% is on that and 50% is on the Seahawks. So it's kind of like an awkward relationship where nobody is ever really happy with my timeline. But if you can put up with a bit of English soccer, then you will also get Seahawks content.
Good stuff. Well, hey, we appreciate you coming on, and we'd love to have you back in the near future. And hopefully we got some exciting news coming up here in the near future too with the head coach spot.
Anytime, guys. My pleasure.
Awesome.
Thanks, Rob.
Okay, thanks, Rob. Hey guys, that's Rob Staton joining us on the show. Again, Rob of the BBC and the Seahawks Draft Blog.com, and also his YouTube channel. So urge you to check that out because he really gets in depth, especially if you're really into the draft, and he really has deep insight on that. And he obviously just threw out some names on the show today that he'd like the Hawks to get, especially on that line. So yeah, interesting stuff from Rob, especially the draft stuff, man. Just kind of guys to look out for there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Rob will be fun to have on when the draft kind of kicks around, once we have an idea of where this team's going, who are some guys to actually like legitimately look at. But yeah, no, I remember listening to Rob years ago when he first kind of started, and like he was talking about the spark scores and all this kind of stuff that, all the new analytics at that time that was coming on. This is probably 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And Rob's always been on top of like that, kind of where the Seahawks kind of like to go. He's actually a big reason for me why I started watching the Senior Bowl and
Right.
like seeing, guys in the Senior Bowl, which comes up here in 2 weeks. So hopefully we have our staff in place before the Senior Bowl so we can actually properly recruit. Yeah, no, I really enjoy having Rob on the show. I think it gives our listeners some really cool in-depth stuff.
Yeah, no, he's awesome to have on the show. And quickly touch on the coaching. He makes a point there with Ben Johnson as far as still in the playoffs. They're obviously a favorite today to win. We'll see what happens. Obviously, if they move on, then you're not, there's another week that goes by, so you might have to kind of, and the fact that he's got ties to probably the Commanders anyways. So it's like maybe, and so, talking Rob saying, hey, Bobby might be the number one on the list realistically, and that's not a bad thing. That's still a great thing. What was your thoughts on that? And you kind of agree on that point there?
I kind of do. I really think Ben Johnson, like, I don't know. I think Ben Johnson's going to be the Commanders' next head coach. I think that's just hasn't been announced because he's still in the playoffs. With the fact that a lot of these, big time insiders have been saying that he's kind of been a package deal with the guy that just got hired there as the GM. I think it's just kind of been a formality. He's taking these other interviews. Maybe something comes up that's going to pique his interest. Like maybe he wanted to hear Seattle's pitch, and maybe that was the only other team he really wanted to hear if there was anyone that was going to turn it. For me though, like I'm going to be honest, I'm going to be severely disappointed if Dan Quinn is the next head coach of the Seattle Seahawks. I'm looking at that going, why did we fire Pete then? What are we doing here? Like, why? Like, I would rather have Mike Kafka get named head coach than Dan Quinn. And that may sound crazy to people, but it's something different. It's something new. And I just look at it and I go, like, Bobby Slowik's who I want to see in Seattle. People can scoff at the Texans game. That Texans team, like Rob even said, they're severely inferior to that Baltimore team. That Baltimore team is the best team in the NFL. People may think it's the 49ers. Not after what we saw yesterday. Not after what we saw when they Baltimore went into San Fran and beat the brakes off of them. So I honestly look at it and I go, get me Bobby Slowik. Let Bobby Slowik and John Schneider put together a wicked staff. And again, it might be one of these DCs, Patrick Graham, or I don't want to mispronounce the guy's name from Carolina. I think his last name's Evro. Like, get one of those guys in here as a DC and say, hey, cool. So you're the DC. It's your thing. You get to work with John on building that side of the ball. I'm going to do my offensive side. Like, maybe their whole plan is bring Bobby Slowik in and Mike Kafka comes in as the OC slash or pass game coordinator, quarterback coach. Get him out of New York, where clearly he's having issues with Brian Daboll, and kind of, I don't know. That's what I want to see. If I hear this week that Bobby Slowik is going to be named the Seahawks head coach, I'm going to be over the moon excited about the direction this franchise is going in. If I hear it's Dan Quinn, there's a good chance I'm going to go into a deep state of depression for the next 5 or 10
I
years.
think but I think you echo a lot of fans. I think Quinn was a name that was thrown out early, like when Pete was still here, and we kind of tossed the idea around. Does Quinn come in here, sit in that defensive coordinator role for a year and then kind of slide in? And that was kind of like because we didn't even know the state of Pete. Is he going to be here for a couple more years? Okay, well, and you didn't know what was going on. Was Jody going to make a move? But now, since Jody did make this move and they've moved on from Pete, we are sitting back and looking at this and really saying, no, we need to go in a completely different direction. Forget the LOB, forget the past coaching, forget this quote unquote culture, because like Rob was saying, and yourself, there's more than just the coach. He doesn't just define the culture. It's not Pete himself. Yeah, he's a part of it, but the culture can live on, and we need a different direction. Like I said, we'll be excited. And like Rob said, you made your bed with the players you brought in on the offensive side of the ball, who you drafted, who you paid. So it just makes sense to bring in that guy. So throw money at this guy, get him in here. And I just look at it like it's not a tough sell. This has got to be one of the most desirable jobs. So, to me, it makes sense. So I think it's like you said, it comes down to John making that decision. Like, I can't see all these guys turning it down, and then it comes down to Quinn, unless Quinn is on his top 3 list. We can't get in the inside of John, but based on the press conference, it sounded like he wanted to. Hey, he realizes the current trend of the NFL and how this game is completely changed, and that he's not stupid. That it might make sense for me to go offensive minded, young, innovative, and then build that staff. So and then just yeah, final thing with the it was interesting what he said about Pete, like when we asked him about, are you see him moving, getting another job or this and that, and he doesn't know what he's gonna do with himself. But and just that whole college thing was interesting when he's saying, kind of going away. But why would you want to go there? Just this whole portal thing and how players can just leave like that with the coach. It is a little crazy. So that was interesting. But that just interesting things he touched on with Pete, like what is he going to do with himself? So that'll sort of be interesting to kind of see how that all plays out too.
Yeah, I'm very interested to see what's going to happen with Pete, what he decides to do. Because again, I think for Pete, he didn't want to give it up. It's like one of those things where you need to let it go. You've done your amazing run from college to pro. Let it go. Like just, and I know, like Rob said, it's something he's done his whole life, 15 hours a day to just all of a sudden have it stop. Like it's done. Trying to fill those voids and stuff is going to be hard. Um, like I could see Pete having a role like in a few years where you bring him in to, if your team's like Pete being a motivational speaker, awesome. Pete would be fantastic at that. Um, and that's something I think he could do. But I think Pete really what he should do, and again, obviously, we're not in the place to give advice to anybody in this regard, but in my opinion, I think Pete, you need to go and you need to take a step back. You need to relax. You need to decompress because, if you don't, I don't want to see his, legacy tarnished by going to an organization, trying to do something there and having it just completely crash and burn. And people go, this guy's a nut, like this is that, like, and then you forget what he's done that's been so great. It starts to tarnish that. And that's the same thing we saw with Russell. Like Russell fought his way out of Seattle, gets his way out, goes to Denver, and now you look at Russell and you go, where is Russell even going to play next year? Who's
Yeah.
going to take a shot on Russell Wilson? But 7 years ago, we were talking about Russell Wilson as one of the top 5 quarterbacks in football,
Yeah.
Hall of Famer, first
Yeah.
ballot.
Yeah.
Now people are saying, is he even a Hall of Famer, or has he
Right.
just been a good quarterback? Like, so that's where you have to understand that line, and I'll be very interested to see what Pete ends up doing.
Yeah. No, it's going to be interesting. Next week or two. I mean, I don't know exact timeline here, but hopefully, I mean, like you said, they gotta go quick. So, yeah. Anyways, Rob Staton, awesome to have on the show again, man. Again, guys, check him out. The Seahawks Draft Blog.com, and you're gonna get most of the stuff from there. That's where you want to go, and check out Rob's YouTube channel because he's constantly posting up videos and live reactions to things. So it's definitely a place you want to go as well. So let's just sit back, enjoy the two games coming up here, and hopefully we got news soon about the next Seahawks head coach. All right, guys, we'll talk to you on the next one.
See ya.
Go Hawks.
Go Hawks.